Welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. You know, we have to ask ourselves, 15 months to go for the election, and it's already, can we stand any more of this politics of self-destruction? It's unbelievable. It's probably the dirtiest presidential race ever, full of mudslinging and name-calling. And the election itself is still, as I said, 15 long months away. Jennifer Wishon brings us the story.
Working to build on American frustration following the tragic shootings in El Paso and Dayton, Democrats running for the White House are ratcheting up their attacks against President Trump.
Can I get a photo with you for Ray-Bans?
The frontrunner among Democrats launching new attacks, accusing the commander-in-chief of aspiring to the same goals as the Ku Klux Klan.
I believe everything the president says is done encourages white supremacists, and I'm not sure there's much of a distinction.
It's a charge Biden's Democratic primary opponents are clamoring to repeat.
Is the president a white supremacist?
He is.
He can't keep trying to stir this up, give aid and comfort, be embraced by the white supremacists, and then say, oh, but not me.
The charges come even though the El Paso shooter made it clear he developed his views long before Trump came along. Meanwhile, liberal customers of high-end fitness brands Equinox and SoulCycle threatened to boycott after learning the chairman of their parent company, billionaire Stephen Ross, is holding a high-dollar fundraiser for the president today.
It's really troublesome.
In addition, Texas Congressman Joaquin Castro, brother of Democratic presidential candidate Julian, attempted to shame San Antonio residents who donated to President Trump's campaign by tweeting their names. That led to backlash from media critics on both sides of the aisle who expressed concerns the donors may be harassed by activists. And it turned out 6 of those donors also donated to him and his brother's political war chest. Tom Bevan with Real Clear Politics tells CBN's Faith Nation this harsh escalation of rhetoric and tactics by the left is risky.
It certainly speaks to the Democratic base, but I'm not sure how the rest of the country is receiving it.
Bevan says while Democrats work to politicize the pain America feels after 2 more tragic mass shootings, the president's actions stand in contrast.
He condemned white supremacy. He went to El Paso and Dayton to serve as sort of consoler-in-chief. Now, whether you think he's done a good job of that or not, the contrast is pretty stark between the way the president's been acting over the last few days and the way the Democrats have sort of spun off the rails on this.
The president denies he's racist, expressing concern about the rise of any hate group, whether it's white supremacy or Antifa. And he swung back at Democrats, tweeting, "The Dems' new weapon is actually their old weapon, one which they never cease to use when they are down or run out of facts. Racism. They are truly disgusting." In an interview with CBN's Gary Lane, Alveda King, niece of Dr. Martin Luther King, backs up the president.
He's not a racist. The race card makes people mad. It stirs them up. You're a racist. You're a racist. Oh, no, we are one blood. Acts 17:26.
The presidential race hasn't even officially begun, and already it's marked by powerful personal attacks. And with well over a year to go, it's likely to get much worse. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Washington.
Can we stand it? Can we stand this kind of stuff? Well, the answer is probably not. But the Democrats think that's the way to go with the politics of self-destruction. And the media seems to want to feed it. And you look at the headlines in the New York Times or the Washington Post, and they're so, oh, it's unbelievable. And also on CNN, you go through the list of them. They're after the president. They just hate him. Well, after a long list of complaints about the bias of big tech companies against conservatives, the White House is getting ready to take action. And this, I think, should alarm us all, because I don't think the government needs to restrict this as much as we dislike to see it. John Jessup has that.
That's right, Pat. The administration is drafting an executive order to stop conservative censorship online, and President Trump is expected to call out what he describes as unfair treatment against conservatives on Facebook, Google, and Twitter. CBN White House correspondent Ben Kennedy brings us that story.
That action would likely be in the form of an executive order, but the Trump administration has stopped short of releasing any specifics. We are hearing it is just a draft at this point, although, according to a White House official, the order would restore fairness to the system. President Trump has issued numerous warnings that he's watching social media giants very closely.
Massive multinational tech companies have gained enormous power to censor opinions.
The commander-in-chief accusing the tech companies of discriminating against conservatives. Now that talk possibly turning into action, with reports the White House is drafting an executive order. An official told Politico that most of Twitter is liberal cesspools of venom and that the president wants some fairness in the system. Chris, if the White House does move forward with this executive order, could they face lawsuits?
I think it's a possibility. The First Amendment protects Americans from the government restricting any sort of speech.
Chris Lewis is the president and CEO of Public Knowledge. As an advocate for strong due process, he believes the user has the right to appeal any content taken down. Although Lewis says he's not seen evidence of bias against political speech. Social media users share things to express their opinions. Why do you think companies feel the need to silence them?
When there is moderation of speech online, it's typically for reasons that violate the practices and rules of the platform. And that's often for hateful, racist, violent speech. And I think that's a good thing. And it's a fair debate on if there should be that level of moderation.
Conservatives believe they've seen the bias, and many are pointing at Twitter for locking Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's re-election campaign account Thursday, after it posted video of a profanity-laden protest outside the senator's Kentucky home. McConnell's campaign manager Kevin Golden said Twitter will allow the words "Massacre Mitch" to trend nationally on their platform, but locks out our account for posting actual threats against us. Twitter said the account will remain locked until they delete the video. Is there a concern over violence extremism on social media?
There's definitely a concern, and this is why we need to work with the social media companies to fine-tune how they do their moderation.
And again, this executive order is in an early stage. It's not even clear what the penalties would be for violating the president's order. Ben Kennedy, CBN News, the White House.
Thanks, Ben. Pat, back to you.
Folks, the phenomenon of the so-called social media has taken place in the last 5 years or so. The power of Facebook and Twitter and Hulu and these other social media things have gained such authority. And it used to be there was some kind of a rule that was at least some type of fairness in the media companies, ABC, CBS, and NBC. There was a certain balance that was there. These social media companies have no rules whatsoever. And if they violate them, so what? Well, it can lead to tremendous problems, but I hate to see the White House coming out with an executive order that mandates what kind of speech we can have. This is a slippery slope we don't want to get on. John?
And Pat, speaking of slippery slopes, the FBI could run into problems as it tries to watch social media more closely for potential threats like possible mass shooters. The Wall Street Journal reports the FBI's attempt to have companies pull information from Facebook would violate the social media giant's privacy policies, as well as its attempts to comply with a $5 billion settlement with the government. The Bureau's action could run up against Facebook's ban on using its information for surveillance purposes. Well, the Supreme Court will take up a case on whether transgender employees are protected in the workplace. The case involves a Christian-owned funeral home in Michigan and has implications for faith-based businesses. The Michigan funeral home requires employees to adhere to a sex-specific dress code so their appearance does not distract grieving customers. The State Equal Employment Opportunity Commission sued the business after it fired a male employee who wanted to violate the code by dressing and presenting himself as a woman. The Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in favor of the employee. The High Court will hear the case in its next term, which begins in October. Well, activists in Hong Kong staged another protest today, this time at the city's international airport. The protesters wanted their demands for democratic reforms exposed to an international audience, but the city's leader says she won't give in to what she describes as violent protests.
To say no to the chaotic situation that Hong Kong has experienced in the last few weeks.
Protesters have taken to the streets repeatedly with their anti-government message. Today's protests come despite a warning from China 2 days ago that it will intervene if the Hong Kong government does not stop them. Pat, these protests show no signs of letting up.
Well, I don't think they will, but I think if the mainland Chinese move against Hong Kong, it will be devastating for them in the world economy, because they have basically said this is a model of how we can coexist with somebody that has freedom. And now we're going to shut it down. They can't do it because actually Hong Kong has been an escape valve. They make all kinds of money. They've got a special Hong Kong gems exchange. People can list on that Hong Kong exchange for, to gain access to the markets. And the government of China just can't afford to shut them down. So. But I do hope that order will prevail in Hong Kong because they need it.